is up, guys? I am Josh, and this is hashtag Life Choices.
I am Anath. This is the podcast where we aim to help you make the best life choices.
And I am David, here to welcome you to Table Talk Thursdays.
Lastly, I am Lem, and this is our weekly segment where we talk about anything and everything under the sun. Thought-provoking questions, life-changing stories, and even the most random things.
Yes, and today we'll be going back to our topic last week and we'll attempt to go more in-depth in it. So this was brought up by Lamwell that we should discuss this further, which is we need to tell our audience what it takes to develop those life skills. Basically, a step-by-step guide. Since we brought them up, we should probably give them the guide of how to develop those life skills as well. So this is part 2 of what is the most important life skills. And we'll also have a part 3, so look out for that. So today we'll be discussing Lemel and David's most important life skills. And next week, we'll be discussing mine and Anath. So maybe it's good for you guys to recap what that life skill is and why it was so important.
Okay, so a quick recap of the 4 life skills we talked about last Thursday. 1 is the importance of social skills. 2nd is the importance of personal finance. 3rd is the importance of how to handle failure. And 4th is being a self-directed lifelong learner.
Yeah, so it's just 2 for today, the first 2. So maybe give us a recap. What was so important about social skills? Why you brought it up?
So here in life, it matters not only what you know, but who you know. And you have to know how to connect with people. And the phrase that I always want to give to everyone that I'm teaching social skills on is have a spirit of care and curiosity. Because if you have this spirit, you will naturally listen to people and you will naturally ask questions. And with this frame in mind, you will create communication. And with communication, you will create connection. And that's where friendships form. And these friendships are what will bring you to succeed later in life.
Yeah, and I remember this thing about C.S. Lewis said this quote. I can't remember it word for word, but basically, all these things that are necessary to live, like food, water, shelter, those are the necessities, but friends and relationships are what make it worthwhile. I think that's a nice thing to point out.
Yeah. And I think if you take a look around, you examine the lives of the most successful people, not many of them don't have people skills.
Yes.
Most of them, I would say, are often the most charismatic people you can find. And I'd like to just say that when you relate to people, it just opens doors to so much opportunities to success. True. Let me just give an example. I spoke with a person earlier this day for lunch, and he is a very successful businessman. And I actually threw this question at him: what is to you the most important life skill? And what he said, without batting an eye, it's to relate. He says it's a long lost skill, especially these days in the age of the smartphones. People would just rather want to keep to themselves or have their friends online. But he says a person relating to a person physically is something people need to do and is a valuable life skill for whatever walk of life you are. If you're an entry-level staff, middle manager, senior manager, if you're the top manager, even if you're the owner, you have to be able to relate to people in order to get somewhere. Essentially, no man's an island. If you're a programmer, you can't just speak to your computer all your life. There's still be instances where you have to interact with another human being. Like if you're gonna buy water, if you don't know how to relate to that person, for all you know, they'd put something in your drink because you're rude or something. So in essence, relating to people is not just the most important life skill for him, it's also the most necessary one, because really there's no escape. We have to relate to everyone.
Okay, so let's go with some practical tips. What can everyone share on how we can be more social,
how we can develop it,
how we can develop this life skill?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I think in this group, I'm probably the most introverted. And
No
Comment down below if you think Josh Garcia is introverted.
So I guess I personally identify as an introvert, and all these tests that came up, personality tests, always reflect me as an introvert. But when I struggle to communicate with people, and the biggest, I guess, hurdle for an introvert is to go up and say, "Hey, I'm Josh. What's your name?" and just introduce yourself and make a connection. One thing that I've learned throughout my years of being an introvert, and I guess the struggle I had in college especially, because when I wasn't a very social person, it was very hard. Especially in college, it's a very group thing. Like you have a lot of group works. You cut class one time. If you got sick, you have to ask somebody for homework. And if you don't make these connections, it'll be hard for you to go through the college life. And that was my struggle. Then when I got to third year, I applied for a leadership position in my organization. And it was only that time that I saw the value in reaching out to people. But that's not only where the value is. It's also valuable in other aspects as well. So why did I intro to that? Because when I had a leadership position, I had to man up and actually introduce myself to people, especially because as a vice president in that organization, I needed people to know me so that they can go to me for their concerns or maybe future projects that they want to do. So what I set as a rule for myself is when I have the urge to introduce myself to someone, say for example, a member that is new, so I just want to welcome them into the org, is I employed this rule called the 5-second rule. And if you guys want to read more about it, Mel Robbins, I mentioned in the last podcast, she has a book about this. But basically the concept is when you want to do something that you know you have to do, just count to 5 and go do it. Okay, so the 5-second rule. Basically what that rule is, if there is something that you want to do and you know you have to do, just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go do it. Why is that so important and why is that powerful? Because our brains are naturally wired towards deadlines or towards things that has to be accomplished by a particular time. By setting that internal deadline of 5 seconds that, oh, I have to do this now, you are more likely to actually follow through on that thing that you wanted to do. So, say for example, how do you apply that in a social situation? You're very shy, introverted like me. Even if they don't believe it, yes, I'm introverted. You just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go talk to that person that you want to talk to, because you might miss out on a great friendship if you don't do that. So that is one of the practical tips that I have learned that I actually employ now, especially as somebody who, well, one does this podcast, meets different kinds of people. I can't be tentative. I also have a radio show. So on the radio show, I can't just let the guests sit over there, wait for the program to start. No, I have to introduce myself, and I have that anxiety when relating to people, but I just tell myself, okay, I'll count to 5 and go do it. So you guys should try that tip as well.
Yeah, so I was actually reminded of something my geography teacher in high school told us when he was talking about how he prepares for our lectures. And so he was saying that he is not the most confident in speaking, and I had always noticed that he was a very good speaker. So these two statements didn't match to me, and so he was explaining that the only reason he was able to speak so effortlessly in front of the class was because he was speaking in front of a mirror at home.
Ooh.
And now I have heard this advice many times when you're preparing for a presentation or something, speak in front of the mirror. And to me, that didn't really make sense. But after I heard his story, I realized what a big difference it makes. Because firstly, when you're looking into the mirror, you can see your body language. How do I look when I'm saying something? And then you get the practice of actually saying everything. So the practical tip here is really just stand in front of a mirror and say a few lines that you would normally want to say when you're introducing yourself, so that it becomes part of yourself, right? And then you know what your body language is, and as a result, when you actually go to approach someone, you know how to act, you know how to say, and as a result, you are more confident, because confidence is very important. If you come off as shy or as someone who is afraid to speak, you're not going to get a response from the person you are talking to. I also want to add, I said this in the podcast last Thursday, and that is that we as humans are created to relate, to be part of a community, and so you can't do life on your own, and as a result you really need to know how to communicate with people. A classmate of mine from my English class, we were sharing some of the books that really changed our lives, and one of the books he had read was a book on how to start conversation, and that could be a practical tip for you if you do not know. Even if you're too afraid to practice in front of a mirror or don't know what to say in front of the mirror, there are enough resources online or in libraries that have information on how you can actually start a conversation.
Yeah, and the thing that I'm realizing as we're having this conversation is half the battle is preparation. Like training yourself in front of a mirror as a practical tip is something that is preparation. You do it ahead of time before you're in that position. Same thing with the 5-second rule. You do it before you engage, because it's half the battle. Being able to prepare yourself for a situation is something that is so crucial that people often neglect, because people just go with the flow, spontaneous, and sometimes when they're there, they chicken out and it's like, oh no, I'm not going to do this, and just do other things. So that affects how we communicate with people.
So I'd just like to echo that sentiment on preparation. And I'd say a lot of the discussion right now has been geared towards introducing yourself, beginning a conversation. But I'd say half the challenge is to genuinely relate with people you are communicating with. And for that, my tip is to do your homework, just like preparation homework. And what I mean by that is start with the people at your home. For instance, your parents, they're from a different generation. You might have an uncle, and it's quite hard to relate with them completely because, again, the age gap is quite large. But I'd say start from there. If you could manage to relate with them in such a special way or build a relationship with them in a close sense, then maybe people your age will be less of a challenge, less of a difficulty, and quite naturally you do that in the future. So yeah, start from the home.
Yeah, and speaking of relating, like we've talked about preparation, what you do before, but basically when you're in the conversation and you're struggling to keep the conversation going, don't ask what questions, don't ask questions that are answerable by yes or no. Ask how or why. So say for example, hey, I got a new pet this weekend. So that's a conversation starter. Now you ask, how did you get a new pet? And then they're gonna talk about basically, oh, I went to the where do you get
Pet shop.
pets? The pet shop. There you go. I went to the pet shop, and then, oh, why did you get a pet? Then they'll start talking about it, and that is one effective way to keep a conversation going, asking how and why. And the key thing there is the focus is on them. You're not talking about yourself simply, and that helps you relate with them because you get to know them more.
And as you do this over time, this accumulation becomes part of you. It becomes natural in the future. And I think that's one more thing that we should have: sincerity. It can't be fake, It has to be genuine. People can sense when you're trying to fake your way
Yes.
into relating with them. So as much as possible, be genuinely interested. Actually, that's a deal breaker. You have to be genuinely interested, invested. I can't be relating to you while half my attention's on my smartphone. I have to be there 100%.
Yeah, I think Simon Sinek talks about that. If you guys don't know Simon Sinek, he's in the field of marketing, but he's also a motivational speaker. And he talks about how a lot of us right now, let's say for example, we're waiting for a meeting in a room, and there's another person waiting in that waiting area with us. Instead of striking a conversation, we just focus on our phones. It's like we're not interested in the lives of other people anymore. And in the times before, people would just strike up a conversation and say, hey, my name's this, and then they start talking. And sometimes those are how friendships are formed. Like how I met Anath, I was just on his way outside. What was that? I was in front of the door. Yeah, so I was in front of the door, and he was just making his way out. And I could have just been like, focusing on my phone, and somebody passes by. I was like, yeah, I shrug it off. But because at that point in time, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna talk to people. So when he talked to me, we were able to keep that conversation going because there was genuine interest to converse with one another.
Yeah. And something I want to add about what Josh said is that I was once having a conversation with someone about how I had noticed that everyone is on their phone, whether they're walking on the street or in the elevator. No one is looking at each other. And so I was saying that I'm the type of person who would like to strike up a conversation with someone I don't know, get to know them. And what my friend was saying is, like it may seem like the norm, everyone's on their phone, but you should just do it. And no one's going to question you, firstly because you're a foreigner here, but at the same time, it's not weird to talk to someone. We just assume it is because everyone's glued to their smartphones. Try something new. When you say hello to someone, how was your day? What's your favorite color? Something like that. It's random, but no one is going to judge you for talking to you. One day I was lined up at the elevator and someone from behind me sort of waved their hand on the side of my head. And so at first I sort of ignored it, but it happened again. And so I turned around and this guy goes, hey, hi, what's your name? Hello. And I was like, wow, how nice is it that someone I don't know comes up behind me and just starts a conversation? That's how we should all be. We shouldn't be afraid of what the reaction was. My reaction wasn't negative at all. I was amazed that someone would have the confidence to actually approach me and just talk to me. And that's how all of us need to be, because communication is really that important.
And that person didn't want to sell you anything.
Exactly. And I think it's so crucial because when let's say for example, I'm buying something at the fast food, I make it a point to strike up a conversation when I can, at least, or when I'm not feeling so down or about something. But I say like, oh, how's your day? Just asking them, and then they're like, what? Someone's interested in what I'm going through, and that brightens up someone else's day.
Okay, so that's really interesting what Josh said, and that's what I did when I learned how to connect with others when I entered college. I used to be an introvert in high school. But when
Sure.
I entered,
I don't believe
I don't believe it.
Okay, no one believes it.
Sure.
But I would say I am. And when I entered college, I had a new perspective. I was like, I wanted to learn more. I want to learn more about people's stories. And so I had this spirit that I was curious and I actually cared for people too. And so kept asking questions. I wanted to know more about their life. And from this process, I have another tip, which is to choose your closest friends wisely. I think there's this quote that says, "Tell me your 5 closest friends and I will tell who you are."
Yeah.
Because it's really true. Your closest friends will influence you. But how do you make these closest friends in the first place? And I would say, just be friendly, gentle, and good to everyone. And be friends with as much people as you can, but choose who you're going to be closest with.
Yeah, and it goes back. The life skill that's important is not just a matter of conversation. It's not just how to start a friendship, but it's how to form a relationship. And that's why the life skill is really social skills. How do you make that connection with people? And I guess to deviate a bit from what David said, I'm reminded by this quote by Richard Branson. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but
Yeah.
train your people well enough so they can leave, and treat them well enough so that they don't want to, because relationships are that important that even if people can leave your life, you have treated them so well that they don't want to. And it applies not just in social circles with friends, it applies to companies as well. It applies in every possible aspect of your life, because relationships, we are a relational being. Everything revolves around a relationship. And that is something that we all need to learn, because that is the importance of knowing these social skills. That's why we're trying to teach you tips on how to communicate and to foster those social skills. And that is why social skills and communication is so important. And if you guys haven't noticed, we're almost out of time. Yeah, we're almost out of time. So yeah, I'm sorry guys. Apparently this is a very in-depth topic. So I think at this point we'll just decide we'll probably do one life skill for the next 4 weeks. Yeah, so for the next 4 weeks, just stay tuned for that. So if you guys want to know more about how to respond to failure, that is 2 weeks from now. Next week will be on personal finance, and then we'll discuss how to be a lifelong learner. But before we go, I'll just recap the things we said, so that if you guys maybe zoned out while listening to this, you could just listen to this last part. So basically, first thing is be friendly, good, and gentle to everyone. Don't make exceptions just for your friends. Do it for everyone, because making that genuine connection with everyone you meet will overflow to not just these strangers, but to the people closest to you. So second is, don't hesitate by using the 5-second rule. Make that internal deadline so that you can go and say, "Hey, what's up? I'm Josh." Next is gain confidence by speaking in front of a mirror. This is a very practical tip that we all need to apply. Well, at least if you want to start conversations, because you're more aware of what you're doing. Oftentimes our problem is that we're I guess doubting how we're coming off to people, but by doing that in front of the mirror, you get to do that better. Next is, you need to be able to prepare yourself. Homework is very important, but you have to genuinely relate to people. Don't make it like an academic affair, like, oh, I have to do it step by step like this. You have to genuinely want to relate with people. Next, how do you do that? Ask how and why questions. Don't just ask what questions, or don't just ask yes or no questions. Ask how or why. Now, next is choose your closest friends. That is so important. Choosing and discerning who you want to have closest to you will determine the kind of person you want to be. We keep talking about this again and again in podcasts. Identity is important. Now, the last two is have a spirit of care and curiosity, because this applies more than just business, more than just your day-to-day relationships. It applies to every single aspect of your life. So much so that Richard Branson applied it in his business, that one of the main ways he can keep his employees is how well he treats them. So once again, thank you guys for listening to the Life Choices podcast. We hope to have you here back on Saturday for Situational Saturdays. But before you go, we just want to remind you, in this life, we have no choice but to make choices.
So choose wisely.
See you in the next podcast.